بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع هداه أما بعد. In today's session we look at another one of the sifat of the huruf, another one of the characteristics of the letters, and in order to recap, we have mentioned previously that which is related to 5 of the characteristics. As we mentioned, we have the characteristic and their opposites. We have mentioned previously the characteristic of al-hams and its opposite al-jahr. We have the characteristic which was yesterday's discussion of al-shidda and the opposite of al-shidda, which is al-rikhwa, and then that which is between the two of them, al-tawassut or al-bayniyah. And we said that these characteristics revolve around analyzing the letters from varying angles. As far as the affair of al-hams, then hams looks at the letters in relation to the expulsion of air or the breath when one recites the letter. In relation to shidda, then shidda looks at the extension or the absence of the extension of the sound of the letter when one utters it. So in today's session then, we look at another one of the characteristics that has an opposite, and this is still from the sifat al-lazima, the sifat al-lazima that have opposites, and we're going to bi'idhnillah finish with these characteristics, or our brief discussion of them is going to finish in today's session, inshallah. Firstly, we look at the 6th of the characteristics, and that is al-isti'la. Al-isti'la, in terms of its language, is a reference to al-ulu or al-irtifa'. Yani, it is a reference to something being raised high, something being elevated. And its linguistic meaning, of course, has a connection with its istilahi or its technical meaning. And that is because of the fact that al-isti'la has a connection to the lisan, to the tongue, and the tongue being raised towards and close to and in close proximity to the upper palate of the mouth, yani the inside of the mouth. And so al-isti'la is referred to as al-isti'la because of the fact that the tongue raises and the place within the mouth is high with the letters of isti'la. Its opposite, al-istifal, is a reference to the tongue being low in the mouth and not being raised. When we're looking at the raising of the tongue, then of course the raising of the tongue, it is, and it may occur in more than one area. We have the raising of the rear of the tongue, the back of the tongue, the end closer to the throat. We have the raising of the middle of the tongue, the center of the tongue, and we have the raising of the front of the tongue. And so these letters then, or these huruf that we're looking at in today's session, are and have a relation generally, if we just remember that as our starting point, that it has a relation to the raising of the tongue, Some of the letters manifest, as we've discussed previously, towards the back of the tongue, some of them towards the front of the tongue, and some upon the sides of the tongue. As occurs, ikhwan, with the previous sifat and the previous characteristics, we have these word combinations that will help us to remember the letters of al-isti'la. The word combination then that we have today, and for today's sifa, is the word combination khussa ضغط قض. خص ضغط قض. خا سين خا صاد ضاد غين طا قاف ضاء. Again, خا صاد ضاد غين طا قاف ضاء. These letters are the 7 letters of al-isti'la, or the 7 elevated letters. As we mentioned, the affair of them being elevated is a reference to the tongue and the movement of the tongue within the mouth. When one utters these letters, then the tongue is raised close to the upper palate of the mouth, and thus the recitation of the letters revolve around the raising of the tongue. This is important, ikhwan, for us to know because of the fact that there is a characteristic that we're going to look at when we actually move into the chapter of Tawheed, from those characteristics that come upon a particular letter. And we have the characteristic of tafkhim and tarqiq. Tafkhim and tarqiq, 2 characteristics that come across or come upon some of the letters depending on how they fall, and the letters that they fall beside and what have you. Tarqiq and tafkhim are likewise from the characteristics that are intrinsic to certain letters. So for example, in this characterization, and these 2 categories here, al-isti'la and al-istifal, then a beneficial principle to understand and to remember is that the letters that are present within this word formation or these word formations, khussa, ضغط, قض, khussa, ضغط, قض, all of them are mufakham, qawlan wahida. All of these letters are considered mufakham, all of them. The opposite, that is the rest of the alphabet, yani al-istifal, then the letters of al-istifal are all muraqqaq except for 3 letters. Alif, Lam, and Ra. And each of these have a chapter that is to come. There is a chapter related to Alif, a chapter related to Ra, and a chapter related to Lam. What is intended by mufakham, muraqqaq? What are these terms and what do they indicate? As far as mufakham is concerned, then mufakham is a reference to the letter in terms of its recitation and in terms of its nature, that it is a heavy, dense letter. In terms of its recitation, its sound, it has a heavier, denser sound when one recites the letter. And that is mainly created because of this raising of the tongue within the mouth, sometimes the rear of the tongue, sometimes the center of the tongue, raising of the tongue within the mouth towards the palate, and the voice or the sound ascending towards the roof of the mouth. So part of the term isti'la, which means to ascend, is not only the ascension of the tongue, but the ascension of the sound of the letter. And so we have this heavier, denser sound because of the positioning of the tongue within the mouth. And so if you were to look at khus, the terms again, the words again, khussa, daghtin, qidh, then these words, each and every one of the letters that are present within them, khus, which is kha, again we hear this deeper, denser sound, kha. We have sad, this deeper, denser sound created by the raising of the tongue within the mouth. Dad. You remember we mentioned that dad is created, or it is uttered and articulated by raising one of the sides of the tongue to meet the upper molars and premolars, the side of the mouth. So dad, again we hear this heavy, dense sound. Ghain, again this heavy, dense, round sound. Ba, ba, again this dense, heavy sound. Qaf, qaf, a dense sound. Wa, az, aq, at, ag, ad, akh, as. These letters then, they have heavy, denser sound. This heavy, dense sound is what is known as a tafkhim. And this tafkhim, ikhwan, it occurs within these letters of the alphabet. The rest of the alphabet is muraqqaq. That is the opposite of tafkhim. That is, the rest of the alphabet is light in nature. And this muraqqaq, a reference to being a light, thinner sound. And that is the nature of the rest of the alphabet. The rest of the Arabic alphabet is muraqqaq in nature. Other than, as we mentioned, 3 letters, each of them have a chapter in Al-Jazariyah. Alif, Lam, Ra. Those 3 letters, each of them have their own chapter in Al-Jazariyah. That is because of the fact that each one of these letters have a state when they occur in a particular manner. We could possibly just mention briefly that alif, in its origin, as we've mentioned, alif is from the letters that are ordinarily muraqqaq. But it is mufakham if it occurs after, for example, a letter that is mufakham. If it extends a letter that is mufakham, then it receives tafkhim. And it is muraqqaq if it follows or extends a letter that is muraqqaq. These are from the ahkam related to alif. That will come, as we mentioned, we have a separate chapter around alif. Lam likewise. Lam ordinarily is muraqqaq, but it occurs mufakham. For example, in lafdhul jalala, Allah. Allah. Lam is mufakham. It is not recited lightly. Rather, it has this heavy, dense sound. But there are circumstances and situations when it becomes, and its recitation is light. For example, if the letter before it is maksur. Yani if the letter before it has kasra, then that which follows from the lafzul jalala, from the name of Allah, is no longer recited Allah. Rather, the lam is recited muraqqaq. So instead of Allah, you would say filla. Why? Because that which is before it has kasra, and so the lam now is muraqqaq. This is one of the circumstances. Likewise, ra, ikhwan, has some 8 scenarios where it is recited mufakham, yani 8 scenarios. And there are 4 scenarios where it is recited muraqqaq. And then there are 2 scenarios where the scholars, they allow the permissibility of reciting muraqqaq or mufakham. And so, for example, ra, if it is maftuh, the origin, that is, if it has a fatha upon it, the origin is that it is mufakham. Like Ramadan. If it has, for example, a letter that has fatha before it, a letter before it, and it itself has sukun upon it, so it follows a letter that has fatha upon it. So not that the fatha is upon the letter itself, the letter ra itself, in which case it would be mufakham, Ramadan. But the letter before it, in this case, the letter before it has fatha and it has sukun, like Maryam. And so we do not recite Maryam. Rather, it is mufakham, Maryam. And so there are circumstances, we'll come to them, of course, when we reach the chapter, but you should be aware and acquainted with the fact that these letters, alif, lam, and ra, though they are not from the letters of isti'la, so they in their origin are not from the letters that are mufakham, as is the case with the letters of isti'la, but there are circumstances where alif, lam, and ra are recited mufakham, circumstances where they are muraqqaq, and that will come. It is important, ikhwan, to be familiar with these rules and these principles, and we're going to see how that becomes and that manifests with our recitation. Just as here we're looking at the letters of isti'la. We said previously with some of the rules, ikhwan, if it were not for the presence of this characteristic, the letter would become another letter, because we're dealing with letters that have similar places of origin. And so it is easy to make a mistake in the manner in which the letter is to be uttered. Either the duration that is to be given to it, the expulsion of breath, the elongation of the letter, or the absence of that. And in this case, then the overall sound of the letter, in that it is recited with the sound ascending. The tongue ascends and the sound ascends towards the palate of the mouth. So we have ta, dad, sad, dha, qaf, ghain, kha. The strongest of these letters the scholars mention, and they arrange them in order of strength in terms of isti'la. The greatest of them in isti'la and the strongest of them in isti'la is the letter ta. Ta is the strongest of them in isti'la. So if you were to put as the hamza before it and place a sukoon upon it, al-ta, it has the strongest sound, or the strongest raising of the tongue and utterance of the sound and articulation of the letter. Then we have dad, which follows it, then sad, then dha, and then the least of them is qaf, ghain, kha. And so these letters of isti'la, ikhwan, if it were not for these letters, then these letters would become other letters. And if it were not for this characteristic, see, if we were to look, for example, at a letter, at ta, mathalan, ta. Ta and ta have a similar makhraj, that is towards the front of the tongue, and with the tongue being raised towards the upper incisors, yani that it is raised and it is placed upon the upper incisors. But what is the difference between ta and ta? Al-isti'la. And so if it were not for this characteristic of isti'la, ta would become ta, in the likes of من يطع الرسول فقد أطاع الله. So it would be من يطع الرسول, من يطع الرسول, because of the absence of isti'la. But with the presence of isti'la, we have the ta, من يطع الرسول فقد أطاع الله. With the letter dad, for example, if it were not for the characteristic of isti'la, dad would be very much resemblant to dal, or to dal, as occurs with some who recite the letters. And so من يضلل الله would be من يضلل الله, because of the absence of isti'la. Sad, likewise, sad would become seen. فمثلا وإلى الله تصير الأمور, تصير الأمور, it would be تسير الأمور. وإلى الله تصير الأمور, تسير الأمور, because of the absence of this isti'la. ضا كذلك, ضا would become ذال, ضا would become ذال. ويدخلهم ظلا ظليلا, it would become ذِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. يُدْخِلُهُمْ ذِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. And this is very close in terms of the manner in which ضال and ذال are resemblant. ضال or ضاء is close in terms of makhraj to ذال. We have to be aware of the fact that one of the striking characteristics that differentiates it from ذال is isti'la. ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا, ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا, and not ذِلًّا ذَلِيلًا. Qaf, similarly, because of isti'la, it differs from kaf. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ. Without the isti'la, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, it would become وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ. Isti'la changes the characteristic of those letters that are close in terms of the makhraj. When the makhraj is close, we have to be very, very careful about giving the letter its right from isti'la or istifal. Similarly, istifal on the other end of the spectrum, if it were not for istifal, ta would become ta. ترجي من تشاء منهن. Allah Azza wa Jal here uses turji. Without istifal, it would become turji man tasha. Turji man tasha with ta. Dal would become dad. Likewise, sin would become sad if there was the presence of isti'la and the absence of istifal. So istifal is from the characteristics of sin that differentiates it from sad. And so it may be because it is not just isti'la that you're looking at, you're looking also at its opposite characteristic, istifal. So if, for example, you were the teacher of the Quran and you were listening to one of your students reciting to you, you'll be listening for these affairs. And is he making and placing isti'la upon a letter that should have istifal? Is he placing istifal upon a letter that should have isti'la? These characteristics you're going to be listening out for. And these characteristics, they come up in the simplest and most regularly memorized surah. If you were to look مثلا at Surah Al-Fatiha and قوله تعالى اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. If you look at صراط المستقيم, listen to and look at the letters that are present in صراط المستقيم, these two words. One of the common mistakes, a regularly occurring mistake with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, is that we do not hear a differentiation between the letters that are present within Sirata, where we have letters of istifal, isti'la. Other than the ra, even though the ra here is mufakham, we have three letters, all of them are mufakham in nature. Two of them are from the letters of isti'la, and one of them, as we said, one of the circumstances where ra is recited mufakham is when ra has a fatha upon it. Ramadan, Ar-Rahman, the ra is recited mufakham, it is recited in this heavy manner, and it is not recited lightly. And so we have sirata, sirata. Sin being from the letters of isti'la, so it should be dense, it should be mufakham. Ra here having a fatha upon it, and so this is one of the circumstances when ra is recited mufakham. Ta, likewise, the strongest of the letters of isti'la, and so it should be mufakham. If you look at mustaqim on the other hand, mustaqim, the meme is not from the letters of isti'la, rather it is from the letters of istifal that do not have a circumstance where it is mufakham. Yani it is constantly muraqqaq. Mustaqim. Seen is not from the letters of isti'la. As we said, if seen was from the letters of isti'la, then it would be sad. Mustaqim. Ta, again, not from the letters of isti'la, and so it's recited muraqqaq. Mustaqim, mim again at the end. Again, it is not from the letters of isti'la, so it should be muraqqaq. And so a common mistake with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, and we'll look at some of the mistakes, ikhwan. As we learn the rules, we'll look at some of the mistakes, particularly in the recitation of Fatiha. We hear individuals reciting, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Mustaqim. Yani because of the fact that we have sirata, all of those letters being mufakham, heavy in nature, we have it accompanying and being right beside a word, all of the letters of which are muraqqaq. And so there is a tendency for the tafkhim to spill over into that which should have and should be muraqqaq, and that which should have tarqiq. So sirata should be differentiated from mustaqim. This is light and thin, the letters of which and the recitation of them and the articulation of them are light and thin, while sirata are all letters that are mufakham, yani mufakhama, and they are all other than ra from the letters of isti'la, and ra in this circumstance with the fatah upon it is mufakham. And so ihdina siratal mustaqim, a difference between the two. Siratal mustaqim, siratal mustaqim, and we're emphasizing just to ikhwan clarify the difference between the two. So these letters, ikhwan, and the rules of the sifat of the huruf are of major importance. Moving on, ikhwan, to another sifa which is connected in essence to this previous sifa, that is isti'la and istifal. We have another sifa that revolves around it, or is connected to isti'la and istifal, and that is al-itbaq and al-infitah. Al-itbaq and al-infitah. Al-itbaq is a reference, ikhwan, to, and this term طبق على شيء, it is a reference to something being sealed or surrounded or embraced or encompassed. And what is intended here is the tongue itself rising again in the upper palate and surrounding or encompassing an area within the upper palate. And so because of the fact that it rises to encompass the upper palate, we have the creation of this stronger sound that is almost trapped in the upper part of the mouth. And so the letters of itbaq are all letters of isti'la. And so this is easier to remember. If we remember and we're familiar with the letters of isti'la, then we'll be familiar with the letters of itbaq. They are not all of the letters of isti'la, though, are the letters of itbaq. We're only looking at 4 letters. And so in the letters of isti'la, we have 7 letters. Khussa, daghtin, qidh. While with the letters of itbaq, we only have 4 letters that are present with itbaq. And as we mentioned, the reason we see that it is referred to as itbaq is because of the connection of the tongue with the roof of the mouth and the palate of the mouth upon recitation. Al-ta is from them, dha is from them, dad is from them, and sad is from them. The 4 letters of itbaq are ta, dha, dad, and Sad. So those 4 letters are letters that are considered stronger in terms of their nature and in terms of the sound. And again, it is almost as though with isti'la, we have the sound being dense, being mufakham, and being pushed in an upwardly manner into the roof of the mouth. But with al-itbaq, it is almost as though the sound is trapped in a pocket between the tongue and the palate, the upper palate of the mouth. Dad, Sad, Dha, Ta. When one recites those letters, the tongue is brought up, and we have this almost trapping of sound between the tongue and between the upper palate. And there is oftentimes something of curvature within the tongue when one recites these letters, usually curvature within the center of the tongue, just as is the case with some of the letters of isti'la. For example, qaf, we have curvature within the tongue, but the back of the tongue, the rear of the tongue, aqsa al-halq, the rear of the tongue, it rises almost to trap the mouth of one's, the mouth of the throat, the back of the throat, or the opening within the throat. It is almost as though with the recitation of qaf, that the back of the tongue blocks almost the back of the mouth. And so these sifat, ikhwan, are important for us to be familiar with. The opposite then of al-itbaq is al-infitah. The opposite of itbaq is al-infitah, and that is a reference to the opening of that which is related to the tongue and the hanak al-a'la, the tongue and the upper palate of the mouth upon recitation of these letters. And so, as we mentioned, all of the letters of itbaq, the 4 letters of itbaq, ta, dha, dad, sad, they are all likewise letters of isti'la. But not all of the letters of isti'la are letters of itbaq. So qaf, for example, is not from the letters of itbaq. Qaf are not from the letters of is not from the letters of itbaq. Ghain, not from the letters of itbaq. Kha, not from the letters of itbaq. And you can see why. When we say that itbaq is almost the trapping of sound between the tongue and the upper palate, we do not have that manifest when it comes to qaf, ghain, and kha. With qaf, ghain, and kha, we have there is an open, the entrance of the mouth is open, though the back of the tongue is no doubt raised, but the front of the mouth is open. Qaf, ghain, kha, aqa, agh, akh, the front of the mouth, and it is open, and so it is not considered a form of itbaq here. But when we look at ta, the tongue comes to meet the upper central incisors, and we have almost a trapping of the sound between the tongue and the upper palate. Atta, alwa, alba, as. The rising of the bringing up of the tongue and the trapping of the sound is what has created this affair. And so these 2 characteristics and their opposites, so we have 4 characteristics here, they are sealed, and Imam al-Jazari, he mentions the affair of 2 last characteristics, and this is just among the characteristics that have opposites. Bi-idhnillah, from tomorrow we're going to look at those characteristics that have no opposites, but today we'll seal the characteristics that have opposites. And the last of them then is al-idhlaq and al-ismat. Al-idhlaq and al-ismat. Al-idhlaq and al-ismat are 2 characteristics that in essence, ikhwan, are not from the characteristics of Tajweed, or from the topics that are related to Tajweed, though we find them mentioned within some of the books of Tajweed, and we find them even among the earlier of the scholars in this era, the likes of Imam al-Jazari, he mentions in al-Jazariyah these characteristics. Though we find مثلا al-Imam al-Shatibi in al-Tayyibat, we find him not mentioning al-Idlaq or al-Ismat. And what is most correct is that Idlaq and Ismat are from the topics related to the knowledge of as-sarf. That is one of the studies, or one of the areas of study of the Arabic language that deals with the construction of the Arabic words and the letters that they are constructed from, and the change of the root form of those words, and the ziyadat, or the additional letters that are added to bring about varying nuances in terms of meaning based upon the combination of those additional letters. Idlaq and Ismat are from the sciences, or from the branches connected to the characteristic of letters that are related to sarf and not related to qira'ah. And you will never find, no matter how established the teacher is, he could be an imam in qira'ah, you will never find him correcting that which is related to idlaq or ismat, because it is not something that is related in essence to the knowledge of qira'ah. What is this idlaq and this ismat then? In a nutshell, the affair of idlaq and ismat. Idlaq is a reference to fluency and ease of recitation. And this is as it relates to the construction of the word. That is, because of the combination of the letters that are present within a particular word, it is easy to recite. It has linguistically a relation to that which is connected to the tip of the tongue. And the characteristic of the Arabic language, or certain words being considered words that are baligha, or eloquent words, because of the construction of the word. And in the science of balagha, one of the areas of the science of balagha, and what is considered a baligh construction, or an eloquent construction, is that the word itself, in terms of the construction of the word and the letters that are used within the word, there are no strange letters that are used within the word, or it doesn't have a strange construction. And that construction returns back to a body of principles. Idlaq then looks at that body of principles in relation to those those words that are constructed of 4 or 5 letters in the Arabic language. If it is constructed of 4 or 5 letters, then it must have, in order for it to be considered a letter that is easy to recite, that is in line with the ease and the fluency of the Lugha al-Arabiyyah, and in line with the ease of recitation of the Arabic words, then it must have, if it is a 4-letter word or a 5-letter word, it must have one of the following letters, 6 letters in total. Firra min lubbin, and in some writings you'll find farra min lubbin. Farra min lubbin, and that is what is most correct. Fa, ra, mim, noon, lam, ba. So if the letter, or if the word is constructed of 4 letters and it does not have one of these 6 letters within it, then it is considered a letter that was a word that is originally taken from the lughat of the A'ajim, from the languages of the non-Arab. And so you'll find that with certain names, you'll find that with certain word constructions, that if they do not have these, I mean, this is of benefit just generally in your knowledge of the language, but as far as qira'ah is concerned, then you don't have to be concerned with idlaq and ismat, which is opposite in terms of the Arabic or the recitation of the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so here with ismat, we have the prevention of us considering a word fluent because of the fact that it is a 4 or 5 letter word and it doesn't contain one of these 6 letters. Farra min lub. It doesn't contain fa, ra, mim, noon, lam, or ba. So مثلا عصجد, which is a word that is used to refer to gold. It is in its origin, and the scholars conclude that it in its origin is not a word that is originally Arabic. Why? Because it does not have within it, it's a 4-letter word, and it does not have within it one of the letters, yani one of the 6 letters of al-idlaq. And so you'll see, ikhwan, that the affair does not return back to the affair of qira'ah, doesn't affect qira'ah at all. Allah Azza wa Jalla has revealed the Quran bilisanin Arabiyyin mubin, and thus this is something related to ilm as-sarf. With that then, ikhwan, we will come to the end of today's session for qira'ah. And it is unfortunate, ikhwan, that we are having to spend as much time as we did, or as we do. The intent was only to be half hour session, but if it brings about benefit, ikhwan, then biha wa ni'mat. So we round up on that note then, ikhwan, and from tomorrow we'll look at those characteristics that have no opposite, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad, wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.